Let's have a look at this now. Another big story this week were promising developments in the COVID-19 vaccine trials. Pfizer and BioNTech have confirmed that an early analysis of trial data shows that their vaccine prevented 90% of COVID-19 symptomatic infections, making the vaccine strongly effective. As a result, we could see a first rollout of the vaccine to a limited number of high-risk individuals before the end of the year. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has led to an obvious need for clarity regarding the regulatory approvals that must be satisfied before a vaccine can be rolled out. Joining us now to clarify the necessary procedures for approval of a vaccine is Silverani Padayachee, Senior Manager for Pharmaceutical Evaluation at the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority. A very good morning to you, Silverani, and thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us on Weekend Dawn. Now, what are the regulatory approvals that must be satisfied before a vaccine can be rolled out?
So, good morning to the listeners and viewers. Well, if you look at any medicine and for inclusive of vaccines, these have to get regulatory approval prior to being availed to the public. So it would mean that the product would meet the accepted standards with respect to quality, safety, and efficacy.
So how does this regulatory process work then?
So the regulatory process is basically known as registrations in South Africa, and it would involve the submission of regulatory dossier, which includes information from the very beginning, development, quality aspects such as the API, the manufacturing process, the controls. The manufacturing sites should be compliant with good manufacturing practice. Important is the clinical trial information, which is required to support the safety and, of course, efficacy studies to confirm the efficacy of the product. So those are reviewed, and once the review is done and the regulator satisfied that these requirements are being met, then the product is then registered.
So I'm looking at things like medical control, council approval, ethical approval, and like you mentioned, the registration, and all of the other processes that you have mentioned. What's the timeline like for that kind of approval, considering that this is a vaccine for COVID-19, and I would think it's rather urgent? What is that timeline like?
So it depends on the information that is available and whether other reviews have already been done. And in our context, SAHPRA is actually prioritizing applications such as these. And we would be looking at between 30 and 60 days based on the information that is available to us for review. Just for a point of clarity, that the Medicines Control Council is now SAHPRA, the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority.
I see. And then what happens in the instance where a vaccine has already been approved from a foreign drug regulatory authority? Can we then go straight to giving it to people to use?
No. The process to be followed is that if an applicant wants to avail that product that has been approved by a foreign regulatory authority, they need to submit an application to SAHPRA, and SAHPRA will consider as a mechanism of review reliance and reliance on the regulatory work done by another regulatory authority. And the purpose of that is actually to reduce the review time or duplication of work. And in such an instance, the full information is submitted together with the report of the regulatory authority, and it should be an authority that SAHPRA aligns with, and reliance will then be considered.
So let's talk about this particular vaccine from BioNTech as well as Pfizer, and where are we in South Africa in the process, considering that it is an American regulatory body, I would say. Is that an easier process for us to be able to get the vaccine going in South Africa?
I wouldn't necessarily say so. These vaccines are also being submitted to those regulatory authorities. They are undergoing various kinds of approval processes, and only once those are available would it be considered for authorization. They have different processes, so they have emergency use authorization, and for instance, the CU would be, the EU would be using conditional marketing authorization. So based on the kind of approvals that's made, SAHPRA would obviously look at reliance approaches, provided that the information in support of quality, safety, and efficacy is consistent with our standards.
Silverani, what I'm taking from this is that we are not actually going to have this vaccine anytime soon in South Africa. It's still going to take, what, at least between 30 and 60 days until it actually arrives in South Africa and is used?
Well, it has to actually be submitted for review. At the moment, we have been engaging with the various applicants who have interest in submitting vaccines for registration. So these vaccines, as soon as the submissions are made, from that date onwards, we estimate between 30 and 60 days based on the kind of information that we have available. So if we have review information that we could rely on from other regulatory authorities, the timeline will be indeed reduced.
All right. That was Senior Manager for Pharmaceutical Evaluation at the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, speaking to us about necessary procedures for expedient approval of a candidate vaccine.